Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for November 13th, 2023. I'm Jaded Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everyone, for this marvelous episode.
I knew you were going to do that.
I had to.
Yeah, just knew.
Low-hanging fruit. It was right there.
Hey.
Had to take it.
Yeah, you got to take advantage of it where you can, right?
Absolutely.
And of course, I come back from Aruba, and one of the first things I come back to with regard to podcasting is a movie where there's only positive discourse.
Yes,
out there
there's
right
no
now.
negativity
No
about this film at
negativity
all.
whatsoever.
Yeah, people love this. Universal praise everywhere. No negativity. You gotta
Nothing.
love it.
Gotta love it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
fact-
we're all about positivity here.
Exactly. And it's not just the Marvels, it's the MCU. No one has any issues whatsoever. Everyone is
Yeah.
excited. And only great things going forward. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure is what everyone is saying.
Best thing since sliced bread.
Absolutely.
yeah.
So you know that with this conversation, the only feedback we're going to get is 2 thumbs up.
Okay, Roger Ebert. I'm sure that's going to be the case.
No, I mean, obviously a lot of people are impassioned by the Marvels for God knows what reason. Well, actually, we know the reason. It's simple misogyny. I mean, that's really
Well, we'll
all
talk
that
about it.
is.
We'll talk about it.
I think that's where a lot of it is rooted in. And look, there's reasons, genuine reasons to criticize the movie. There's genuine reasons to be cautious about where the MCU is right now and to be concerned about where they're going forward. I
Yeah.
get all of that.
Yep.
But the malicious attitude toward this film from some is, boy, it's something.
We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. At any rate, we're here to talk about the Marvels, the latest entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is directed by Nia DaCosta, who surprisingly has gotten some of this as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just because of the film, but externally.
Yeah, well, she was kind of forced into the conversation after that whole Variety article that kind of threw her under the bus with this whole scenario of her having to leave production of this film to work on her next film, as if to forget that Steven Spielberg did this at least 2 different times in his own career.
This happens all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. So again, I ask, why Nia DaCosta? What is it about her that is so different from everyone else that has directed a Marvel movie? I wonder what that could be. It's a mystery.
Well, let's not get into that. Let's get into the movie.
Well, we'll get into the movie. I'm just saying there is a theme of brewing here.
There.
At any rate, it is written by the great, the wonderful, delightful Nia DaCosta. And it stars Brie Larson, Teyana Paris, Aman Vellani, and a slew of others. Samuel L. Jackson, of course, is in the film as Fury.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not familiar with the Marvels, Carol Danvers gets her powers entangled with those of Kamala Khan and Monica Rambeau, forcing them to work together to save the universe.
Wow.
All right.
What animation. What animation from
Trying
you.
to, man. I got to get
Someone
hyped
someone
up
is
for this.
passionate.
Heck yeah. What do you think about the Marvels?
Oh my, I don't even know how I can live up to that, because I feel like I'm just going to maintain like this sort of passivity throughout this entire conversation now. I do want to go back to our review of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania from earlier this year, where we weren't the biggest fans of it, admittedly, right? But I felt like we were a bit more positive during that discussion than maybe we should have been, because there was a lot of talk about how that was at that point the worst MCU film, and I think those who say that forgot about a little movie called Love and Thunder. It's not good. It's not good.
That's an objectively worse movie.
It's a terrible movie. It's a terrible movie. Now, Quantumania has admittedly not held up very well for me, but I still don't think it is the worst MCU film. At least with that film, there were moments where it attempted to get a little weird that I appreciated.
Sure. Yeah.
I bring all that up to say is that I feel like I have the exact same thing to say about the Marvels. It kind of sits in the same category for me. I don't think this is the worst MCU film. In fact, if anything, it's kind of interesting. It's at its best when it does get a little bit weird. I just feel like the film kind of doubles down on what really worked about something like Quantumania and then doubles down about what didn't work about it. So in a way, it's kind of more of a polar extreme reaction that I had to the movie. In its best moments, it's actually really good, but in its worst moments, I actually don't think it is very good at all. The problem I have with the movie is that the Marvels specifically, I really think it feels like an unfinished movie. It doesn't feel finished to me. And that's not really just speaking to the short runtime. It is a much shorter film by comparison. It's not including end credits, it's probably just over an hour and a half long.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's much under 2 hours, which
yeah,
you don't see that often.
You don't see that very often for an
days.
MCU film, not at all. But it does feel kind of incomplete to me. I forget which critic said this. I think I saw it on YouTube. Maybe been Sean Chandler or something like that. He said the film felt like both a sequel to Ms. Marvel while also being Captain Marvel 3. And I, as if to say, like, completely skipped over Captain Marvel 2. Like, there's a sequel to this to that movie that never happened. I kind of agree with that. There are times when I feel like the writing here and just the overall storytelling doesn't really do the characters enough favors for the arcs that I think it's trying to go for. That said, there are moments where I do think the film is at least a bit creative, where I have to give Nia DaCosta some credit, especially in those opening moments when the whole entanglement sets itself up as this kind of central conflict that brings these three characters together. There actually is a little bit of creativity in the way that that's sort of choreographed. And I think that's at least interesting. And then there are two specific scenes that we'll talk about later, I'm sure, that are head scratching. And
there's something.
I like that I had that reaction. The fact that I'm not sure how I feel about them is I'm waiting for more movies in this universe to do that to me. So the fact that they're here, I have to give the movie a lot of credit. It just, as a complete package, it doesn't feel complete to me. It's a very inconsistent movie. And I felt those seams a lot, which is why, like, I don't think it's the worst film in the MCU. The highs are too high to simply ignore. But in totality, it does sort of represent what I think a lot of people have issues with regard to the MCU in general. A lot of the things that people have criticized about, I can sense that in this movie, at least based on the product that was put out. So it's a hit or miss affair. I think it's very middle of the road. I think the film's fine, honestly.
Okay. Well, at the risk of being at the spite that is centered at that's centered on the discourse, I think this film is actually really fun. I really enjoyed myself.
Okay. All right.
It's the first female team-up movie we've had in the MCU. I mean, we got that moment in Endgame, which a lot of people saw as pandering. This is a lot more organic, and it makes sense given the characters involved. So it's definitely noteworthy in that regard. Iman Vellani is a freaking star. She is captivating in this film.
I grinned like a doofus every time she opened her mouth.
She's so good. And again, I know there's some controversy surrounding this character for reasons that are baffling to me, but I find her innocence here endearing, very funny. Teyana Paris and Brie Larson, I think, are also very good. I think our three leads have good chemistry. I love their dynamic.
Yeah.
Everything hinges on it. And without it, I think this film is much lesser than what it is, but I do think all of that works. The action is actually kind of creative at times, especially that first action sequence. That I think is a big part of the trailer. I think is very good.
The first act of this movie, I actually think, is genuinely pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And overall, I loved how contained it is narratively. Some of what we see has larger implications, especially at the end. But most of this film isn't about the larger MCU world building, which stays in line to what the MCU has been in Phase 4. It may not be top tier MCU, I'm with you there, but it's not bad either. It's perfectly fine and diverting. It has inconsistencies for sure, and maybe it lacks the gravitas that is often associated with the quote unquote best comic book movies. At the same time, though, this isn't trying to be a Batman movie. It's not aiming for heft or emotional nuance. I mean, this is a movie that randomly turns into a Disney musical at one point. It's just
and I loved it. I think I loved it. I'm actually not sure, but I'm glad I had that reaction.
Look, either way, it's just trying to have some fun. And honestly, I think it mostly succeeds in that regard. Its biggest issue is that it doesn't do a great job of adding any context to Monica or Kamala. If you didn't see Miss Marvel or WandaVision, you will simply be left behind. This isn't a new talking point, but Marvel can't keep relying on these TV shows to add important details for the movies. For example, despite this film featuring Nick Fury and Skrulls, what we see in Secret Invasion has nothing to do with what we see here.
Oh, I would recommend you do not watch Secret Invasion going into this. And the big thing, too, is that the performance by Samuel L. Jackson feels like two completely different people between Secret Invasion and this.
I have seen that sentiment. I don't agree. I think
I
a lot of it
hated
comes down
Samuel L.
to-
Jackson in this movie. I think he's terrible here.
Oh, I disagree. But
I
don't
think he's so bad.
I think he's committing to what this film is tonally, which is very, very antithetical to what we see in Secret Invasion.
And very antithetical to the trajectory of that character.
Maybe
like, honestly,
we can talk about that here in a little bit. But I do want to finish my opening thoughts here.
Sure.
I think, again, despite this film featuring Fury and Skrulls, what we see in Secret Invasion has nothing to do. Yeah, it has nothing to do with what we see here. Now, maybe there's some contradictions at hand. Marvel has at least opened themselves up for questioning as it relates to the Skrulls. Maybe it's just accidental, but it doesn't affect this film at all. Whereas Miss Marvel and WandaVision are required viewing. Miss Marvel more so because Kamala Khan's entire family is in this film.
Yeah.
And I love them. I love them in Miss Marvel. I love them here. They're hilarious and add a great quality.
Yeah,
but
there's
it
no
may feel
introduction.
jarring for those that didn't see Miss Marvel. As long as the MCU keeps doing this, it will continue to be a part of the discussion. But as someone who did see and mostly enjoyed Miss Marvel, so much of the narrative here around quantum entanglement, space jumping, and eventually opening up another multiverse, that all makes sense after seeing Miss Marvel and what the Bengals are capable of. And because of this film's diverting tone, I think there's plenty of fun to be had here. And again, despite how slight it is, I think it mostly succeeds in that.
Yeah. There's a lot we can talk about with regard to the necessity of all of these Marvel Disney Plus shows that have become required viewing. There's this new thing that like Echo is going to be called like this Marvel Spotlight or something like that, which is meant to, I guess, denote something that doesn't 100% fit into the grand scheme of things, unlike some of these other shows that actually will play a part narratively. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, shouldn't all of these shows be doing that anyways? It's like I don't think that's the right way to go about it, but that's another discussion for another time. You're right that in order to at least feel some connectivity with these people, you should have watched WandaVision and Ms. Marvel by now. Like the story here will still make sense, but you'll have no frame of reference. You'll have no integration with these characters, especially with the Khan family, right? Like getting to see that family for the first time in this movie, if you don't have Ms. Marvel to back it up, you're going to have no emotional investment with it at all.
It might be quite jarring too, because their family dynamic is so wonderfully bombastic. I love it.
Yeah.
And they carry over that same style and energy from the show into this film, which I really liked. But yeah,
Well,
I mean,
and
if you
it's even
have
gotten quirkier when they've recognized Kamala's powers, and that became part
exactly,
of it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so it just raises a lot of questions going into this for the first time, not knowing that family. Like, oh, so I guess the family knows that they have a child that's a superhero. Okay, I guess we're just buying into that now. Okay,
Mhm.
so yeah, it does required viewing might not be the right way to put it, but it definitely hurts the movie if you haven't watched that show. I really
Mhm.
think it does, because the chemistry between the three leads, as you said, is one of the stronger components here. If there's anything that's able to fix any of the writing issues here, or some of the blanks on the page that I think are definitely here, a lot of it is due to these three performances and trying to fill in some of those
Mhm.
gaps where needed. I don't think they fill in all of them, but I think there's enough that is filled in for the most part, especially when we start like getting into more serious notions from Carol Danvers' point of view, and how her actions at the end of Captain Marvel almost turned her into a bit of a villain for other people, right?
The
Uh,
Annihilator, they call
the
her.
Annihilator, as she's called here. And the idea that someone as powerful as she is would have to reconcile, or basically deal with the consequences of those actions and how they led to further consequences she didn't even know about. I like that idea. I This is where I think the film does feel like it skips over an actual sequel to Captain Marvel, because I feel like there's more to that story that could have been told elsewhere, and I'm not sure if the script here is able to do that arc any favors. But Brie Larson's at least good enough to at least make you buy into whatever emotional investment we need in that conflict.
Mhm.
So it mostly works there thanks to her. But if it weren't for her and these other two leads, there would be a lot missing here, a lot more missing
Yeah.
here.
I agree. I think that's where I find Carol fascinating here, because what we come to find out is that she essentially killed the Kree god. So they
Yeah.
call her the Annihilator. And that fits in with the theme of phase 4 and 5, which is all about the destruction of a belief system and especially higher powers. We see this in Thor Love and Thunder, where
Hmm.
Thor realizes that gods aren't living out their purpose, but instead they're mostly selfish and egotistical, especially
Yeah.
Zeus, someone he really looked up to his entire life. We see this in the Eternals, where they learn their creators, the Celestials, have been lying to them their whole lives and aren't as benevolent as they thought. It's in Wakanda Forever. Shuri has to confront the legacy of Black Panther. We talked about Secret Invasion earlier. It's a bad show. I agree with Brendan
Hmm.
there. But Fury's emotional fallout was all rooted in how he put his faith in the Avengers and how they failed in Infinity War.
Yeah.
So far in this era of the MCU has all about confronting the past, whether it be cosmic like Eternals, Wakanda Forever, Thor: Love and Thunder, or as we see in Spider-Man: No Way Home, Doctor Strange, Black Widow, Guardians 3. All of those movies are about characters confronting their past and how they were shaped by it. This
Hmm.
film is following the footsteps of those movies, with it examining the fallout of Carol's choice to destroy the Supreme Intelligence. Should that have been the second movie, to your point? Perhaps. I think
Hmm.
there's a lot to explore there,
Yeah.
because there's been massive ramifications to that choice, not just with the Kree, but other worlds that have now become affected because, sources are being siphoned off. People feel lost. There's so much to Carol's choices that did antagonize her to many, that this film only introduces. It doesn't
Hmm.
really get into that as
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
However, I do think it's there enough, and that is then deconstructed in a way based off of her interactions with Monica and Kamala, and how she's able to kind of break out of the bondage of being haunted by those mistakes and being isolated and alone essentially for 30 years.
Hmm.
This film does tackle that, at least as it relates to those three. It does come through a little bit. Now, it is thinly veiled. I do
Yeah.
agree there.
Yeah.
The
Very.
film doesn't get into it as much as it could have or should have, but I at least appreciate that it's thematically trying to be consistent with what the larger MCU has been trying to do over the last few years with Phase 4 and now 5.
No, I think that's fair. And you're right that I think if there is anything to fill in those gaps, it really does come down to these three performances. Like
Yes. Yeah.
you definitely get the sense that, and one of the film's themes is trying to find an almost familial or sister-like dynamic between the three of them.
Yeah.
And I do think that is felt primarily because of how good they are. Like if there's any squandered potential here, it's really just the writing underserving these three talented actors, right?
Mhm.
And if anyone has the most to really do, it is Aman Vellani as Ms. Marvel, and it's because in a lot of ways this feels most like an extension of her show, and her show was the most recent thing leading up to this. In fact, the post-credit stinger of Ms. Marvel is one of the opening bits that happens in this movie, so it is very much a literal tie. So in some ways, it almost feels like she's kind of the star, and
Yeah.
but again. I said it earlier. I'll say it again. Every time she opened her mouth, I grinned like a doofus. Like she's
really
adorable. She is
Yeah.
absolutely adorable. And there is this constant fawning that she has over Carol Danvers that I know has apparently annoyed some people, but I don't know. I found it less annoying than Tom Holland and Tony Stark. Honestly, there's like that was way more grating to me than whatever we get here. So at least the banter between the three of them is able to fill in some of those gaps, like I said. And when the entanglement stuff happens in that first third, it at least has some creativity behind the choreography of it. Like the synergy of it, the way it almost kind of mathematically works at times, and the way they have to time it between all three of them. Thankfully, it doesn't just work at the convenience of the movie and the plotting. Like I was afraid it was going to do that based on the marketing, that it was just going to be, oh, like they can use their powers whenever, but at one point they're going to switch. Just kind of happens, but no, there's actually a reason for that, and I appreciated that there is some logic there.
I agree.
But I think there's at least a little bit of creativity that DaCosta is able to imbue those scenes with.
I agree. I think Kamala Khan is such a fascinating and compelling character. I love the energy that she brings to this film. And I think it actually is important, not just to the growth of Kamala here or the trajectory of her character, but I think there's an interesting collision with Carol in this film because of that adoration you're talking about, where she clearly loves and wants to be Captain Marvel and have a life like hers. However, as we just denoted, Carol isn't living some sort of idyllic life. She's struggling with regret and haunted by these mistakes that she's made, which has left her isolated for the last 30 years. It's not the life Kamala has envisioned at all. And I think that juxtaposition is actually quite compelling. And to see how that collides throughout the film, especially early on, it's a little jarring for Kamala. However, that energy doesn't dissipate despite perhaps some disappointment in Carol. In fact, if anything, the optimism that she incessantly glows is something that Carol desperately needed. And I love how that eventually renders camaraderie between the two. And of course, Monica is a big part of that, given Monica and Carol's previous relationship. So the dynamic between the three of them, it's the crux of this film. It's the DNA of it. While all of these other thematic or dramatic through lines that are there in the film, we can debate how thin they are or how inconsistent it might be.
Yeah.
The heart of this film is that dynamic. And there's some fun action scenes that do a great job of highlighting this quantum entanglement that they have. The editing is having a lot of fun with it as well. The music is having a lot of fun with it. These performers are having a lot of fun with it. And that's the beating heart of this movie. And I think there's a lot of joy to be had there.
Yeah.
Despite it maybe lacking nuance, it doesn't have the heft that comes with the best of these movies. But I think it's a far cry from something like Quantumania that is uneven and lacking in, the fun factor
Well,
of it all.
I actually think this movie is more uneven than Quantumania.
I
But
disagree with that.
yeah, but I think in its best moments, this movie is way more interesting, primarily because of the camaraderie between the three leads and the fact that there is at least a lot of creativity in those early entanglement sequences. Like I said, I thought the first third to this was genuinely a pretty okay movie, actually a pretty good movie. And then there's in all of these Marvel team up movies, in some way, there's always one moment somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the turning point where our leads collectively have to learn to understand each other, right?
Mhm.
It happens at least in every Avengers movie in some way, right?
Yeah.
And I really wish that scene here was even longer, because there actually is a lot of great dialogue between them and trying to understand each other, to the point that, man, this would have been interesting if we just used this opportunity as a pure team up movie between the three of them and not even worry about getting bogged down by the villain and her backstory. And if we could have found a way to maybe put the focus more, even more so, on the three leads, I think this could have been an even more interesting movie. Because that middle part there and the way that they share some time together, I thought was actually quite lovely. And I
agree.
could have dealt with even more of that.
I agree. I mean, I don't think Darben is all that interesting of a character. It's also a little bit ironic because it's not a prominent character in the comics either.
Yeah.
But I also can't shake the feeling that this film doesn't care. It doesn't really care about any of that, because it's really more about these three leads. Now, we have to have some sort of dramatic pull or some sort of narrative pull, really. We have to get from A to Z something for them to fight. But I never got a sense that the film really cared all that much. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we can certainly debate. Should the film have maybe put some more emphasis into it or drew us in? Because in a weird way, it's the Thanos thing of, I'm doing something for the betterment of these people that I care about. There's understanding to be had because of Carol's choices. So to something you said earlier, that's where, again, the missing context of Captain Marvel 2 that doesn't exist could have filled in some of those gaps. Because I do find that interesting, but at the same time, I just don't think the film really has any sort of emphasis in wanting to get into all of that, where it does put focus on those three leads. And some of those details comes through in something like the quantum bands we see in this film, which is slightly different from the comics. And I do appreciate that, because what we come to find out with them here is that they were used to map out all of the hyperspace jumping that we see. And I think there's some interesting symbolism there. And of course, there's the inscription that circles back to what we find out in Miss Marvel that essentially reads, "What you seek is seeking you," which does speak to Kamala and how the band is calling out to her. But in the context of this film, it also reverberates fate and destiny as it relates to these three characters who are tethered to each other. Yes, by powers, but also on this spiritual realm at the same time, which also symbolically ties to how the two bands are, constantly seeking each other out since they were forged together. And given that these three characters are functioning as those bands, so to speak, they have the same powers. In a weird way, you could say that they were, brought together through fate in that regard. I do love those parallels there. And those parallels, I think, are effective because the film spends time in building those things up. And there's a lot of fun to be had there. But I do agree that at the by doing that, there's a bunch of stuff that falls through the cracks. And I don't disagree with those criticisms. That's why I also find it a little bit inconsistent. I can't go as far as you in that regard, but I do agree that it's there. But where where the film's strengths are, I think it's actually pretty good.
Well,
and it, I was able to really enjoy the film as a result.
And you might be right that the film doesn't really care all that much about Darben, that's her name, I think. And to be fair, I actually think Zawe Ashton's performance is not that bad. I actually think she's at least compelling as far as uh, she can at least make me believe in the threat that she's capable of, which I guess
Sure.
is all that she needs to do. But
Yeah.
I don't know if the film doesn't really care as much about that character and that threat, then I just wish we got so much less of her. It kind of reminded me
Yeah.
of actually the best comparison I can make to another film in the MCU is Thor Ragnarok, because anytime we cut back,
kind of the same way.
well, yeah, anytime we cut back to Hela on Asgard, played by Kate Blanchett, I was just get me out of here, just get me back to
I
to
agree.
Thor
That's
and
a good comparison.
yeah, because everything Sakaar, I believe that planet was that involved Thor and Valkyrie and Jeff Goldblum and Bruce Banner once again. All of that stuff was great, and everything else I feel like is where Taika Waititi was taking the day off, and that's kind of what I feel like here. I feel like this is where I feel like it's kind of an incomplete movie because those scenes involving Darben, it's when the movie is purely functioning as an obligation. But
Yeah.
when it's involving purely our three leads and their time together, that's where I feel like Nia DaCosta is making a movie she genuinely wants to make.
Yeah.
And there is a very big disconnect between those two extremes for me.
Look, I don't really disagree with anything that you said there. I actually feel about this the same as I do Thor Ragnarok. That is such an apt comparison. I know a lot of people love that film. I don't know if I'm as high on it.
I think it
others
came out at
because
it came out at the right time. It was
came
very
out at-
different
yeah.
tonally for the
so
MCU.
different.
Yeah.
So very different. And I think you can almost say the same thing about Captain Marvel because this film tonally is quite different than Wakanda Forever
Yeah.
and Doctor Strange and Spider-Man. And,
Yeah.
I guess Quantumania is it has a little bit of the levity because of Paul Rudd and that cast, but the stakes of that film, though, are so high, and that's the movie that is introducing Kang into the MCU in such a larger way than He Who Remains in Loki. So even that film doesn't quite have the comedic heft as the previous two Ant-Man movies. Captain Marvel, I feel like tonally is the Ragnarok of phase 4 and 5. And the timing of it, I think, is very similar in that regard. But structurally, I think it falters in the same way. I do agree with you. I love Kate Blanchett. She's one of the greatest to ever do it. And that
Not one of my
character
favorite
is-
villains. Not one of
is
my
not
favorite villains in
good.
the
It's-
MCU. Yeah.
She does her damnedest to make that character engrossing, and I think her performance does compel me. But the writing and just the way that film is structured, just nothing about the character is all that interesting. The best parts of that movie are exactly what you talked about. It's all about Thor and Hulk and all that sort of stuff. That's great.
Yeah.
Where this film, when we're away from Darben, that's when it's at its best. I very much do agree. It is an obligation. That's why, the Taika Waititi really care about that film structurally and having some sort of antagonist. Probably not. I mean,
No.
you're right. He probably wasn't even there on set. That's
That's
probably
what it
Kevin
feels
Feige
like.
thing.
Like it actually feels tonally and aesthetically disconnected from everything else.
Yeah,
And I kind of feel the same way about Darben and her involvement here.
Exactly, because we need a threat for the heroes to act against. So
Yeah.
there has to be something, and Darben is the character that has been chosen. And as I noted earlier, I do think fundamentally there is a Thanos level of empathy to be had because of Carol's choices. The film just doesn't want to get into
and I
in
guess
any sort of meaningful way.
I guess I wish it didn't even have any of that if it wasn't even going to bother. I mean, it's kind of a it's a double-edged thing. I guess I'm in a weird way. I kind of respect that it at least has some nuance there, but at the same time, I also wish there was less, which is a weird way of going about it. There's one thing I did find kind of funny, if that was the goal regarding Darben. And there is this common criticism with many superhero movies these days, and not just Marvel, and how they all have to end with a world-ending threat. And at the end of this movie, you don't get more literal than the destroying of our sun.
The sun.
Yeah, so I don't know if that was meant to be kind of tongue in cheek or sort of a joke, but I kind of appreciated the the literal jab at the world-ending scenario that's at play here. So if there's any praise I can throw to the inclusion of Dar-Ben or just a villainous presence here, it's that specific threat at hand. It's okay, like that's at least kind of funny. That seems kind of self-aware. That I at least appreciate.
Well, and again, it goes back to that polarity of it's interesting, but the film doesn't do enough to really justify it.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting that Dar-Ben is stealing resources from planets that do mean something to Carol.
Yeah.
She is making this personal. She is the Big Ten of this movie.
Oh,
sorry to bring sports into
yeah,
this.
yeah. Okay, that's actually a really fair comparison.
I couldn't look. If you don't know anything about college football, that won't make any sense.
I'm sorry,
whatsoever.
folks.
But it came to mind and it made me laugh, so I had to go with it. Otherwise, I'd be laughing and there would be no context as to why. But yeah, I mean, now I've completely distracted myself.
Never thought we'd make that comparison between.
I know, but here we
and
are.
Yeah,
but here we are.
Only we would do that. Really, you would be the one to do that.
I know. Well, I couldn't help myself. I thought it was very apt.
It is actually very apt. Yeah, that's a very good comparison. That's a great analogy.
But at any rate, I know a lot of people listening don't follow college football, but that is to say, like Dar-Ben, it's interesting that she is making this personal.
Yeah.
And I wish the film dug into that. So to your point, should it even been there? But the choice I think is interesting. She's going to make this personal because of Carol's choices. So she's going to these planets that mean something to her. Mm-hmm. And that's where these resources are coming from. So it's like these little jabs at Carol that opens up that vulnerability that's there in the character that I do appreciate, because ultimately, like how Monica and Kamala, interconnect into that for Carol and her trajectory in this film, I think is interesting from that perspective.
Sure.
As it relates to Dar-Ben, again, the writing just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
But how it affects Carol and her comrades here, that I do find interesting, that it is this personal thing. At the same time, though, we've gotten to a point in the MCU, and I know that it's perhaps myopic, it's indignant. I don't know if I should bring this up. And it's a criticism that I've pushed back. I've pushed back against this in the past. However, maybe it's just the context of where we are now with the MCU, especially in a post-Endgame world. I can't help but think about how a character has the power to harness the sun, which puts the earth in such jeopardy, given everything that they had just fought for in Infinity War and Endgame. How none of the other Avengers are involved in that process is a little baffling. Like, I think we've gotten to that point where that criticism might carry at least a little validity. And the fact that no one else shows up, I think adds to that comedy effect that you were talking about.
Now, that one I think is more inadvertent if it is going for anything like that. The only way I think you can explain that now is if there's a sudden twist at the end of Phase 5 that all of Phase 4 and 5 was actually in a different reality than the Infinity Saga.
Well, I'm pretty sure Marvel has, they've articulated that everything we're watching is in the 616 world.
Yeah.
So this takes place within the same reality as we've experienced over the last decade or so with these movies. So I don't, at least by Marvel standards, by what they've claimed, I don't think that's the case. Mm-hmm. I think maybe it's a lack of judgment. It's probably a lack of resources and getting people involved in there and them not wanting. Again, I mentioned earlier, I appreciate that this is self-contained. There is a cameo midway through, but it's very brief and it's casual. So I don't mind it all that much. And it makes sense given the context of the situation and what these characters had just
Yeah,
experienced.
didn't bother me.
Didn't bother me all that much. So I appreciate that it's self-contained, but given the dramatic stakes of it and that it involves Earth, where most of this is cosmic, so it's understandable that it's self-contained. But when you bring it that close to Earth, again in a post-Endgame world where they had fought.
And that's the thing. You're right. Like
It
for
just
how
doesn't make sense
for how
anymore.
often it feels like Marvel's kind of bending the multiversal rules to their advantage to tell the stories they want to tell. They're also disregarding their own rules at the same time. So it's, I don't know. You're right that there is a lack of logic when it comes to that, because they're constantly trying to find ways to bend the multiverse to their own advantage. And then it leads to these questions like, but wait a minute, where are these other characters? They should be at least aware of this because this is a huge thing. So I don't know.
I guess, I'm probably overthinking it. If I'm going to be simplistic about it, one, you could chalk it up to being, all of this happened so so briefly that there was maybe no time to respond. You could chalk it up to that.
Yeah.
Also, there's no Iron Man. Captain America
Yet.
is now Falcon. Like, is there anyone even on Earth that has cosmic sensibilities to do anything about it? Maybe, I don't know. We got Spider-Man. He's not going into space.
No.
Captain America's not going in this. Like, Thor and Hulk are really your only two options here. And I guess based on where Thor Love and Thunder ends, he's not anywhere near Earth when all of this is taking place. The Guardians aren't on Earth, or are they? I don't even know. I don't think so.
Well, Star-Lord,
Well,
I
one of
guess
them,
is. I guess.
Star-Lord,
Well, that's the thing. There are times, and this is not a criticism. This is just an observation. There are times that with each new Marvel movie, I actually don't necessarily know where it takes place chronologically. Like at least with like phases 1, 2, and 3, we were
made more sense.
It made more. Well, I mean, it was kind of clearly defined that every movie was a next step in that chronological timeline or that chronological narrative. But here, like, I wouldn't be surprised if each movie is like all like it's just each has a different piece within the narrative. Like some could be further ahead, some could be further behind. And we still haven't addressed that giant celestial from Eternals that has been sticking its hand out of the ocean for the past couple years now. It's like,
and maybe that's the answer to the question. The Eternals could cosmically be involved, because it takes, that event takes place close to the sun. So there are only a handful of characters that could really do it. And look, we're overthinking and overtalking what is essentially a small part of the movie. But you can't help but think about that, though, in the context of all of this being post-Endgame, and we're in phase 5 now of the MCU, that to have a little crossover there, it makes sense. And I don't think it's unwarranted. If you could make it work, I think it makes sense. But maybe in this context, these 3 characters are the only one that really could do anything about it. Because Spider-Man and Captain America aren't.
We just have to assume that those conversations were maybe had by Nick Fury and those respective parties, right? So, like, as if Nick Fury said, "Hey, these cosmic women got it. You don't have to worry about it, Thor. You're good.
And maybe
You're
that's
good."
it. And look, that's honestly fine, because I do think in the dramatic context of this film, we've talked about how so much of this hinges on those 3 and their chemistry and them coming together the way they do. I honestly don't have a problem with it. I think it's a lot of fun still. So I remove that that part of the equation out of it. And I still like how all of that concludes there.
Yeah.
Even if Darben's ability to fight them off is maybe a little overblown.
And the way her arc crystallizes, it definitely goes back to what you said about the movie not really caring about that character.
Yeah.
It quite literally just just gives the character what she wants, and it's like, nah, you were good, we're good.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. They kind of Indiana Jones it in a very weird way.
They do.
Yeah, but again, it definitely proves that they had no interest in that character, which is why I wish we spent more time with just the camaraderie of
Yeah.
our three leads, because
Yeah.
those moments are definitely where the film is at its strongest.
For sure. I don't disagree with that. It is a little clumsy with how some of that is handled at the end, especially when we've seen Captain Marvel at her strongest. And look, she's one of the most powerful in all of the MCU.
Yeah.
She would be able to handle Darben with ease on her own. I mean, she manhandled Thanos, for crying out loud. Like,
She did. Yeah.
Like, Thanos is lucky that he survived her and the witch, the Scarlet Witch.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
Those are the two most powerful beings in all of the MCU.
Yeah.
So
Darben is no different than Ronan the Accuser. So
exactly.
Yeah, and who the Guardians were able to take out single-handedly.
Exactly. So we have to embellish for dramatic sake. I get it. And look, there's some fun shots and use of slow-mo they want to get in there to get those money shots.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of fun with it despite the embellishment and despite the contrivance of it all. It's a little absurd, but to me it's sticks in line with what this film is tonally and what it is at its heart. And it's those three coming together.
Yeah,
and that's what happens there.
And I had enough fun with it in those moments. It's another one of those Marvel movies where I find myself putting it at the like when I'm grading these on Letterboxd, it falls once again into that 2.5 out of 5-star range for me, which is, I feel like that's been my common grade for all of these movies for the past while. And it just, but that's, I don't think this is the worst of the batch that we've seen. I think that criticism is a little bit harsh. I think there are more interesting things happening here, and those highs make it more worthwhile than something like Thor: Love and Thunder, for instance, because you already mentioned it. There's a musical, not even a musical sequence. There's a musical planet, like, or where they literally can only speak in song. I don't know if it works, but the fact that I'm questioning it is what I love about it.
I kind of loved it.
Then there's also a sequence involving a bunch of baby kittens set to the song Memories. That, again,
from Cats. Yes.
I don't know if it works, but it goes there, and I have to applaud it. I have to applaud the weirdness.
I mean, exactly. Like, I can't help but love that because there's a playfulness to this movie. I mean, it turns into a Disney animated musical almost. I mean, Carol's outfit magically transitions into like this Disney princess like dress. And they have a song that's straight out of like Beauty and the Beast or something to that effect.
It's actually not a bad song. Like,
it's not a bad.
It's
fun. It's colorful. It's flamboyant. And look, it is strange. It's a little weird. It's a little awkward. The awkward tension did have me squirming in my seat a little bit. I'm not going to lie. But there's something about the strange ambition of it that I couldn't help but admire. This is so very different and new.
Give me more of that. Give me more MODOK. Like, I'll take more of that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, say what you will about how visually strange and tepid it is. It's at least weird and going for something, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Florkins here. I agree. I love Goose. I love the use of the Florkins here. And again, it's because of the playful quality of it all. And I know that we argued about Sam Jackson earlier. That to me is why I liked him here, because he's not trying to emulate the Sam Jackson of old. He's not trying to be the Fury of Secret Invasion. He's trying to emulate that playfulness, or at least play into it, because that's what this film tonally is asking. Fury from Secret Invasion would not have worked here. Fury from the Avengers would not have worked here. Fury from Captain America Winter Soldier wouldn't have worked here. Those films are asking him to be very different tonally and dramatically. This is a movie that wants Fury to be a part of it because of where Fury's at within the context of the MCU. But we need Fury that is going to fit to what this movie is, which is having an embellished animated fun.
And
that's who he is.
And I wish Samuel L. Jackson was able to sell that. He seems so checked out for me the whole time. Like that's the thing. Like if that's what they wanted him to convey, that's fine. I just don't think he's trying to do it. I didn't get the sense he was trying.
Okay.
I love the man. I think it's a genuinely checked out performance. I really do.
I mean, you might not be wrong. And he's just making gobs of money at this point.
At this point, yeah. But maybe I am like wrongly looking at it through the lens of Secret Invasion coming before this. Because this is something you and Dave talked about when you talked about the state of the MCU on the last main show, was how bad that show was, but how Samuel L. Jackson was so good in it.
He was committed to his performance there.
Yeah, and
it's a committed role.
And I do think he is very good in that show. That while I don't necessarily disagree that type of performance would have been jarring for this type of movie, I think the context between that character transitioning to what he's doing here is missing. So seeing that connectivity is kind of missing there too. And maybe that's what's fueling my dislike of the performance as well. It almost seems as though like what they're trying to suggest is, hey, Nick Fury went through some shit in Secret Invasion. Hey, he doesn't care about it anymore. Like that. That's what it kind of feels like to me.
And that to me is less Sam Jackson, and that's the writing. What is he asked to do here? He's mostly in this film to
make
react
quips. To make quips.
To make quips. He's reacting to all of this funny carnage around him. He's dealing with Kamala Khan's family, and he's dealing with these Flurkins. That's what he's doing in this movie. He's not asked to do anything dramatically hefty at all like we see in Secret Invasion.
No,
so
he's not.
To your point, could they have written that into the character where coming off the heels of that, he's recoiling from the events of that show? Yes, they probably should have. Despite what this film is tonally, I don't disagree. That should have been within the confines of the character, but it's not there on the page. It's not there on the page.
It's not
I can't
there.
blame Sam Jackson for that.
Well, Sam Jackson has made me laugh before many times in the past, not even just as Nick Fury. And that's the thing. It's like almost every line of dialogue here is some type of joke or some type of quip, which is fine. That's fine. I'm not trying to make this as a hyperbolic statement. I didn't laugh once when he spoke. I didn't laugh once at anything he said here. Yeah. And I think part of it is him just not conveying the right kind of light mood to make me believe that he was committed to the joke. I felt like he didn't want to be in this movie. That's what I felt like the whole time.
And I can't go as far as to say that I think he's bad here. I don't think that he's a disservice to this movie. He is arguably inconsequential, though. You remove him from the equation and nothing changes really. And
True.
To me, it's hard to, I guess, go hard in the paint, if you will, with his performance or the character when he means so little to the overall outcome.
Yeah, he's in the movie a lot, and if the goal was to make us laugh, I'll just say this: it failed for me. And that's why I was so harsh on his performance. And I think it is partially on him. I think it is the writing for sure, but I do think it is partially on him as well.
I will say this, though. If I was to push back against that, maybe the goal isn't to laugh. If it is, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I don't really recalling laughing at anything he says. Was I charmed by and still engaged with the character? Yes.
I wasn't. That's the difference. Yeah, I wasn't.
still think that he offers an engaging presence that works for the film, especially because of what he's asked to do here, which is mostly offer quips and jokes and add to the playfulness of this film. And I think he is trying to do that, even if it isn't, he's not Korg.
He's not Korg. No, I mean, Korg is Korg.
Will make you laugh. And I love what I hope he sticks around in the MCU just to play that.
Just to play Korg. Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
hopefully he prints enough pamphlets.
Exactly. He's not doing any rock, paper, scissors joke.
Yeah.
Fury isn't.
Yeah, nothing like that.
And so look, he's not, but he's also not a comedic actor. So I'm not expecting him to be Korg either. And maybe it's unfair of the film to ask Fury to be that. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. I didn't find him comedically entertaining. Did I find him to still be a diverting, consistent presence with this film? Yes, I did feel like he at least achieved that.
Well, yeah, I do think he is going for laughs. Like at one point when he's trying to, he's trying to inspire Monica Rambeau to fly, and yells "Black Girl Magic." Yeah, that I thought it was cringe. And it's just it's the way he said it for some reason. And Sam Jackson, like I said, he's made me laugh before. His brief screen time in The Other Guys, I think, is hilarious. I think he is genuinely funny in that movie.
Yeah.
And heck, even in Pulp Fiction, he's really funny. So he's not incapable of comedy. He's not. I do think there are times he's going for that here, and I just don't think he sells it. But
Black Girl Magic, the writing of that, not Tarantino. Not gonna lie.
But it's meant to be funny.
Is it though?
Well, then what's the point in having it if it's not meant to make you laugh?
I don't know. Have a quippy little moment, I guess.
Well, quippy little moment's meant to make you chuckle and not make you cringe.
I mean, maybe. Or it could just make you smile. I mean,
okay, well, it made me frown. It made me frown. So.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, I think the idea behind it is compelling given the character dynamic there. I don't know if that's the best comedic writing, though, either.
Oh, no. The idea behind anything that character, Nick Fury, says or does in this movie is not my problem. It's all about the execution. It's all about the execution here.
Yeah, and I guess I'm here to argue, I think the problem, if there is an issue with the character, I think it's just as much, if not more so, the writing. I think the writing behind the character is very rudimentary. And there's really not much to it. I mean, Black Girl Magic is a fine line, given the context. He's talking to Monica. Maybe that could work if he delivered the line better. I don't know. But it's 3 words. I don't know if it's meant to offer a laugh out loud moment. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I think when you look at his comedic performances in other movies, he's working with much better written dialogue. I mean, even outside that moment, if we look at the entirety of his performance, it's not like the writing is comedic gold. It's not.
No, but I don't think his performance is either. Even the way he interacts with Kamala's family. Anytime I laughed, it was because of them. And when it would cut back to him, I got distracted.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I do think her family is.
They're the high. They're one of the high. They are the comedic highlight at least of the movie for me.
Yeah, Zenobia Shroff, who plays Kamala's mother.
Yeah, she's good.
Amazing in the show, and I think she's very good here as well.
Sure.
I love the energy she brings to that character is great.
The older brother, played by Sagar Shakha, I believe his name is, who plays Amir. I think he's very funny as well. Mohan Kapoor, who plays the father, is also very good. The whole sequence of them going to space for the first time, I think, is actually like that. Their reaction to it, I think, is funny. That I would at least,
I agree. I don't disagree. There's something better. I think Sam Jackson is still fine. The writing is tepid, but I think he's perfectly adequate here. He's McDonald's, perfectly adequate.
If McDonald's rotted in the trash for about 3 years and then you ate it.
I disagree. All right, spoilers for the rest of this conversation.
Okay.
Although we've talked about the ending, quite specifically already, but we're gonna get into the mid-credit scene here. I want to get your thoughts on what we see in the mid-credits. So, spoilers for the mid-credits if you haven't seen it. But what we come to find out is that Monica survives. Shocking. She survives. She wakes up in a hospital bed, and she thinks she's talking to her mother, but it's not her mother. Instead, it is the character of Binary. But she's not alone. It's not just Binary in the room. Also in the room is Kelsey Grammer's Beast. Hank McCoy, baby. The X-Men is officially in the MCU. What say you, Brendan?
I found it very anticlimactic.
Shocking.
Well, what does it really reveal? Something we already knew was coming?
Yeah.
Like that's like every
Just
single
confirms.
I mean,
Yeah.
confirms, I think, is kind of a loose term at this point now at the MCU. Is like
Okay,
I feel like everything they confirm is like just more sprinkling of breadcrumbs, just little by little by little, which they've been doing for like the past 4 to 5 years. To the point that I think in the next 4 to 5 years, I feel like we've gotten very little. So it's that I think that's my thing. It's like I don't love the character they chose to introduce this concept with anyway. And again, I feel like we're just getting news that we already knew was coming. It feels very passively announced, and that was kind of my thing with it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of burnt out by the X-Men theory surrounding the MCU at this point. Now, I was actually more intrigued by what we saw in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, if I'm being perfectly honest. At least with regard to Patrick Stewart as some other version of Charles Xavier. But yeah, here just okay. Guess we're getting the X-Men now. That was my reaction.
Well, okay, so here's where I'm a little bit mixed on it.
Okay.
I will say this. I'm excited to bring the X-Men into the MCU because the X-Men are such pivotal characters to Marvel that if we're going to do the MCU in a genuine, pure way as we see them in the comics, they need to be a part of this.
I agree. I agree.
I am excited for the MCU in that regard. And also circling it back to what we've talked about so many times over the last year or so, the MCU, by and large, is in a little bit of a rut. I don't feel that way personally. I liked Marvel Phase 4. And honestly, between this and Guardians 3, I know this is a little bit of a hot take, I guess. I think they're 2 for 3 of films this year. The shows, okay, Secret Invasion was bad, but Loki season 2 was great. So I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be, or at least as some make it out to be. I think they're still doing okay. However, what Dave and I really talked about the most, I feel like on the main show last week, is that there's been some volatility in terms of quality, but maybe more importantly, what are we building to? With Phase 1, we knew that they were building toward the Avengers, and it crystallized after 4 or 5 movies with the Avengers.
Yes.
By the time we get to Fantastic Four in 2025, and then the there are 2 Avengers movies that are coming out after that. I mean, we're talking about a year and a half of this volatility before we build to something that is going to get people excited.
Yep.
So by sprinkling this in, it at least plants the seeds that, hey, stick with us. We're going to get there eventually. The X-Men are coming, and they're going to be important to all of this, especially when we get to Secret Wars and we have this multiversal war that is at hand. And what I think they're building to specifically is the Fox and Disney war, which on paper, I do find kind of intriguing. I think what we're going to get is perhaps a little bit of a re-envisioned X-Men, like the Fox Studio X-Men films from the 2000s.
Yeah.
Because as we see, Binary is there with Hank McCoy.
Yeah.
Okay, she wasn't a part of the X-Men
even
films.
Hank McCoy looks a lot different too. So it kind of makes me think it might be a slightly different version.
Slightly different, but mostly the Fox, X-Men. It'll include Deadpool as well. Deadpool will be a part of that as well. But what we're going to get is the Fox X-Men characters as one universe with, again, additions or re-inversioned lineup that will go to war with the MCU characters that we've come to know over the last 10 years. That will be the Secret Wars war. Eventually getting to a point where when that film crystallizes, it'll be a merging of the two, which is what happens in the comics. There's a merging of the two. And so that's when we'll get the MCU characters as we know them now with the Fox X-Men characters living and coexisting together. That's where this is heading, I think.
It makes sense. Makes sense.
Planting those seeds now, I do think is important because people are getting tired, and it's going to like Fantastic Four comes out. What I think I said May of 2025.
Yeah,
we still have another year and a half before we get there.
And you're building to something that I was thinking to myself about. Like I don't like when it comes to Phase 4. I don't necessarily mind the the containment of it. Like people saying that it has no roadmap or it's directionless, I don't necessarily agree with. But if you look at it this way, if you look at Phase 1, between the first Iron Man and then building to the first Avengers film, that was a 4-year period. Mm-hmm. And then with Phase 2, building to not just Ultron, but then to Captain America Civil War, that was a 4 to 5 year period. We're in that same period of length between the end of Endgame and where we are now. And we're nowhere close to any kind of buildup like that. No. I feel like the amount of the amount that's been revealed to us is maybe the equivalent of like 2 to 3 movies, like at least back in phases 1, 2, and 3, right? And the way that you said that these reveals kind of feel like a quote unquote stick with us, it's coming kind of thing. That's where I think it's frustrating. And the X-Men reveal here felt like another one of those to me, just with maybe a slightly more confirmed angle to it. And that's why I was a little bit I knew this was coming. I feel like this is nothing really new right now.
It isn't new, but I do find it invigorating in the sense that, hey, it's the first time we've officially seen it in the MCU. Maybe not the most exciting of characters. I like Hank McCoy enough. Mm-hmm. Kelsey Grammer's version of it 20 years ago, I think, was fine. I don't know if that's the character that would have gotten the most excitement. I mean, if you would have thrown in Wolverine, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, then you really would have gotten people's attention. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know that he's going to be a part of Deadpool 3 next year, so it's not as if it wouldn't have made sense. I don't know how you connect him to Monica Rambeau in that regard. Yeah. Hank McCoy makes sense because he's a scientist. He's a doctor. Yeah. So, of course, he would be there, trying to figure out who this character is, how she got there. Like, I get it. I get it, but maybe in addition to Hank, you throw in a Wolverine just to jolt the energy. Yeah. And really reinvigorate people's passion for the MCU.
And that's the thing. It's like I don't, maybe that's the thing. I don't necessarily mind the character of Hank McCoy being the one that was chosen, but the way it was presented, it still feels like it's only a half commitment at this point. And I feel like most of these reveals have all been just half commitments. And maybe that's why it was kind of a shrug for me. And maybe they're obviously saving some of these big things for future films. But we're 5 years into this. I think is there a possibility that it's just simply waiting too long at this point?
Well, I guess it depends on who you ask. Yeah. I'm a Marvel comic nerd. I grew up on these comics. I've read a lot of them. So I don't feel tired of it necessarily. I'm also a cinephile. This is another thing Dave and I talked about. Mm-hmm. Okay. You and I, Brendan, we're going to watch 250, 300 movies a year. Mm-hmm. Okay. For all of the discourse around how tired people might be of the MCU, they have to be talking about the discourse. And I agree, the discourse is insufferable. But I'm sorry, out of 300 movies, and you and I are probably on the low end, there are critics, cinephiles that will watch 400, 450 movies in a year. Mm-hmm. 3 movies out of 450 is nothing. Absolutely
Well,
nothing. In fact, I joked with Dave before seeing the Marvels this week. The last Marvel movie I saw was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 back in May, and that felt like 70 years ago. That felt for like Quantum Mania came out this year. If you asked me on the streets tomorrow, I don't know if I could tell you that came out in February of this year because that felt like ages ago to me.
yeah.
You know, so like three Marvel movies in a year to me and to you is nothing. It's absolutely nothing because there's so much that we see. But a lot of people only go to the movies a handful of times. You know, 3, 4, 5 times a year, maybe. I threw out a dozen. Even if you go to the movies a dozen times a year, which is on the high end for a lot of people, for the general public, that is. I mean, okay, three Marvel movies out of 12. Yeah, sure, that's a lot. And if you go 5 or 6 times, that's half the time. That's half of your time at the theaters a year.
Yeah, I feel like that changes slightly when you're forced to lump Disney Plus shows into the equation. Then, and if there is a sense of exhaustion that people feel about the MCU, like in my personal opinion, the real blame, it's the Disney Plus shows. The Disney Plus content is the big culprit here. And it's not just because that a lot of them have been varying degrees of good, right? Or mediocre, right? That's certainly part of it. But it's the necessity of them.
That's the thing.
That really, and I think because of the time and effort that Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige have been putting into the scheduling of the Disney Plus content, it is then dripping into the quality that people are feeling diminishing in the films. It's a direct effect of that. The point you're making, I think, is very valid. But yeah, without these Disney Plus shows, I think Phase 4 is a very different story. I think what they did with this Disney Plus content was a really big miscalculation. Just the time and effort that one is required to put into it. And maybe that's where the exhaustion's coming into it, where that sense of quote unquote saturation is coming in. It really does stem from that, if you ask me.
I don't disagree with that. And that's something Dave and I also talked about because, yes, 3 movies a year really isn't that much.
It's not.
At least for someone like you and I, it really isn't. However, with Phase 4, I don't want to say last year, but with Phase 4, which granted does circle back to 2021. So from 2021 through 2022, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 shows. Now, I didn't watch all of What If, but WandaVision, Falcon Winter Soldier, Loki, Hawkeye, Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, I watched all of them. And yes, I agree with you. WandaVision especially had 9 episodes. The rest of them had 6. No, and She-Hulk had 9. But those were
that was
20,
sitcom-y, so
30 minutes.
they were shorter, so that doesn't really count there.
Absolutely. But still, you're talking about 8 shows, that if you watch them on a weekly basis, expand essentially a month and a half each.
Yeah.
So, yeah, between 3 movies and 4 shows a year, that can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
If you want to keep up with everything. And to your point, it's one thing if they're complementary and not required viewing, then whether you catch up with them or not, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But the fact that Miss Marvel is required viewing. And as much as I love WandaVision, WandaVision and Loki, I think, are top tier MCU products, but they are required viewing.
Yeah.
They are. You need to watch them.
Yeah.
WandaVision not only had an impact on Doctor Strange, but obviously even in this film with the Marvels.
Yeah, with Monica Rambeau.
So, and look, Loki season 1 and season 2 was going to have a huge impact on the multiverse saga.
Yeah.
Miss Marvel, obviously, I'm sure we're going to get more She-Hulk, when they get to World War Hulk and all that sort of stuff. Who knows with Moon Knight if he bleeds into the movies at all. And then even with Phase 5, you have eventually Daredevil's coming down the road. We just had Loki season 2. Echo, Agatha, Like, I loved Agatha. She was one of the best parts of WandaVision. She was great. Does she
She-
need a series? I don't know. Probably not. No. Ironheart I kind of get, but again,
Yeah.
is it necessary? Maybe. Because I suspect that Ironheart will eventually end up being with Young Avengers, which is another thing they teased. I completely
Now
forgot
that
about that until a
that
second
tease
ago.
I actually found kind of interesting, and primarily
Yeah.
because I already liked the character of Kate Bishop, so that was
Yeah,
I
she's
at least
great.
like seeing her again.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like with phase 4, to me it wasn't a quality thing. Like the films I mostly liked, even the TV shows. Loki I thought was great. Falcon and Winter Soldier was uneven, but I liked it more than I didn't. Hawkeye I really liked. Miss Marvel I liked more than I didn't. Moon Knight is messy, but love its ambition. I really enjoyed She-Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I still think there's plenty of joy to be had there. To me, it's and maybe the quality isn't top tier. If that's
It's
what
not
people
as
are expecting.
consistent. It's certainly not as consistent, and I think part of that is when you put so much effort into all of this content at once, you're gonna notice a dip in quality because it's so hard to sustain that kind of longevity.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the talking point is how it's really not a quality issue. I think it's more of a quality control issue, if that makes
Fair
sense.
enough. No,
Uh,
I think that's fair.
yeah, but you're right. Like I think you like Phase 4 more than I did overall. But I'm not gonna sit here and knock that it was a complete misfire because there were a lot of great things in it. From a movie standpoint, I love Eternals. I think Eternals is a wildly weird movie, and I want to see more Marvel movies do that very thing. And even the ones I didn't love, I at least admired some of the ambition of them, such as Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, or even Guardians Volume 3, which I know now we're bleeding more into Phase 5 with some of those examples, but at least there were things that I did appreciate. It's just it doesn't have the same level of consistency as other phases.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I mean, because again, I also loved Eternals. I loved Spider-Man: No Way Home. I
like that.
liked Doctor Strange.
I like Shang-Chi. That was fun.
Liked Shang-Chi. Absolutely. So, like, I still think there was way more good than bad there, even if, maybe these films don't reach top tier status. I still think there's more good. The problem is, what does it lead to?
Yeah.
Nothing. I think that's the bigger issue here is it's a Marvel Phase 1 feel and structure, but there's no Avengers to cap it off. And then also you're bleeding in all of these other shows. People are now starting to feel overwhelmed by it all. And then you get to Phase 5 and it's a lot of the same thing. You have the movies, which, like I said, between the Marvels and Guardians 3, I think that's 2 out of 3. The shows, so far, Secret Invasion was awful, but Loki season 2 was great. So again, it's the inconsistency as you're talking about. But again, Phase 5 won't lead to anything either.
Yeah.
In terms of films, the last thing we're going to get is Deadpool 3 next year and Captain America: Brave New World.
Yeah.
Okay? Those will hopefully be good movies, but they're not Avengers movies. They're not bringing X-Men into the MCU level excitement.
I'm assuming that they won't have a sense of finality. That's the other thing. Like each phase beforehand had at least a sense of closure to them, right? Even if it wasn't an Avengers movie to close out that respective phase, Ant-Man closed out Phase 2, right? Like that first Ant-Man, and even so, like there was at least a moment in there when when Scott Lang had to try and rob Avengers headquarters. It weirdly gave that movie like a sense of closure, like it was still closing out a phase, right?
Yeah.
Like it felt almost like a bookmark or like an epilogue of sorts. Each phase has done that. Phase 4 didn't really do that. And from what I'm seeing, Phase 5 is not going to do that either.
No.
There are no chapter markers here.
No, there really isn't. It's not until we get to Phase 6 where we get to Fantastic Four, as I noted earlier, and then the 2 Avengers movies.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's where I'm curious where X-Men starts to fall in all of this.
Yeah.
Is it just going to be in Deadpool 3 and what we get there? Are they going to introduce them in something else that we don't know about yet? I don't know. Or is it just going to be, hey, here's Secret Wars, where all of your beloved X-Men characters are going to show up in some significant way? I mean, maybe that's the plan. I don't know. But I will say planting Hank McCoy into the MCU as it stands right now, I think because of how overwhelmed people are feeling, how there's this sense of reeling that is taking place, at the very least, I think it plants something to say, hey, we got something coming. Just stick with us.
They should have done that specific thing earlier, but
I don't disagree.
but you're right. I mean, there is definitely more of a confirmation here than we've ever gotten before, but it still only feels like it's halfway there. So I don't know. Maybe they'll reveal something so big, or they'll save it all for Secret Wars that we'll sit back and think, oh, thank God you didn't give us anything. You just waited to give it all at once.
Yeah, and it could be
maybe,
that.
Maybe it could be that. I don't know. I'm not betting on that, but maybe it could end up going that way.
Yeah.
Needless to say, there is, especially after we conclude Phase 6 and whatever we get afterwards, if there is more to do, especially now that we have the Fantastic Four introduced and the Young Avengers and Thunderbolts and the X-Men, all of this, there is going to have to be some sort of retooling as far as scheduling is concerned and how content is given.
I kind of wonder if that's coming along soon as well.
I feel like those rumblings are happening.
Yeah.
And that's why we've started to hear movies like Blade or properties like Daredevil Born Again sort of go through this retooling process in their own right. I think there is a lot of talk happening about how the MCU presents itself going forward after Phase 6 concludes.
For sure. I agree. My last thought on this, I know we're running long, so we'll get out of here. My last thought on this, circling it back to the Young Avengers tease, again, with how playful the movie is, I love how they regurgitate the whole Sam Jackson Iron Man scene. But just completely ripping off of it. You're not having fun with it all.
Oh yeah, I didn't mind that. That was actually kind of cute.
I love that. So that was really funny.
Yeah.
Love how the film ended there. Love Kate Bishop, so that was a fun little cameo.
Yes, that was cute.
Enjoyed that. At any rate, that's our thoughts on not just the Marvels, but apparently the MCU as well.
Well, it's called the Marvels, so we're talking about the Marvel of it all.
The Marvels of it all.
Yeah,
exactly. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think we went pretty long. I think we can get out of here.
Yeah.
The Marvels right now, if I were to do a quick ranking of the MCU thus far with all of these properties, I think we're at 43 properties right now between movies and Disney Plus shows. So of those 43, I'd probably put the Marvels somewhere in like the high 30s, somewhere like that. Maybe like, I think I have it like 33 right now. So not quite bottom 10, but not quite mid-tier. It sounds like you like it a little bit more than I do if you're going to try and do a quick preliminary ranking of all this stuff.
Yeah, I have not thought about that at all yet, but just off vibes, I'd say this is easily mid-tier MCU for me.
Okay.
I do like this quite a bit. I'd probably give it 3.5 stars on Letterboxd.
3.5. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So it's inconsistent. It's far from flawless, but I think there's a lot of fun to be had, and its central trio is really great, and Kamala's family is really fantastic. So I think there's a lot to like here, despite its blemishes and how slight it is. And I will take that any day over some of these others that are maybe aiming for something more, or trying to have more sophistication or whatever and just falter like a Quantumania. I would take this over Quantumania, and it's not even close.
I still would, because its interesting moments are better than anything in Quantumania. The highs are just too high. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of its lows are a bit lower, but the high, I'm giving it credit where credit is due, that the highs are just that good.
Okay, fair enough. So I like it, but let us know if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here. You can hit us up on social media. You can email us incessionfilm@gmail.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun stuff. If you're listening on the podcast, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, however you listen to the show. leave us reviews on those platforms as well. We would greatly appreciate it. We have a written review of this up on the website at insessionfilm.com as well. So go and check that out. Brendan, anything else before we get out of here?
I think we're done talking about Marvel for the rest of the year, right? No more discourse.
Yeah,
no more discourse.
I think that's literally all they have planned, right?
I was gonna say I don't even know. I wouldn't be surprised if another show drops in the next couple weeks.
I think they have What If season 2 coming out.
Okay, that barely
might
counts.
be early It's either late December or early January.
It might bleed into early January, so it might be one of those those year-end crossover events or something like that.
Yeah. The next big show though is Echo. That comes out January 10th, I believe.
Which was already confirmed to be that Marvel Spotlight thing, which I guess means it's not required viewing. Like maybe I mean, like we said, all of these shows should technically be a quote unquote Marvel Spotlight then. So it's like but I mean if it works, they probably have some type of formula going forward with how they want to manage their Disney Plus content.
Yeah, and then we might not get another film until Deadpool next summer because Blade was I guess it's never coming out. So
I was gonna say, is that movie ever coming out now?
Who knows? Who knows?
Pretty soon we're gonna hear that Mahershala Ali quits.
I mean, I'm surprised he hasn't already.
I mean, I hear he's been frustrated with the process, and I can't blame him.
Yeah, I can't blame him either. At any rate, we'll have more Marvel to talk about down the road. That'll be it for now. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, man, Kamala Khan. What a fun character.
She is marvelous.